Could the beast be the same as the creature from Jekyll Island?
It is the same.
So thank you very much, Mr. Griffin, for joining me on this episode. How are you?
Well, I'm doing fine, and thank you for inviting me. It's my pleasure.
Fantastic. You've authored probably one of the most influential books that has circulated amongst almost every guest that I have ever spoken to, The Creature from Jekyll Island. So, in that book, you talk quite explicitly around the origin story of the U.S. Federal Reserve. Do you want to just give us the version that you feel comfortable with in terms of what is the U.S. Federal Reserve?
The Federal Reserve System, of course, is considered by most people, and myself in the beginning included in that group, as an agency of the federal government. And as such, we who went through the government school system were taught that any agency of the federal government or the state government, governments in general, were good organizations because they were there to serve the people. And I believed all of that at the time. So thinking that the Fed was a government agency, I had a great deal of respect for it. Well, I discovered that it's not a government agency. Let's start with that. So what is it? Well, if it's not a government agency, it's a private organization. It's a corporation, and the corporation was created not by a state government, but by the federal government. The federal government can create a corporation just the same as a state can do so. It's a corporation made up of banks in America that all join together in kind of a what you might call a labor union. It's an association, they like to call it, an association of banks who have formed together for their mutual benefit and to create some unity across the board for all banks in America. And of course, that just sounds like it's a pretty logical thing to do. Let's have some control over the system. Let's have it uniform. Let's have it understandable by the average person. So we're all rah rah so far on that. But it turns out not to be that. The association is actually a cartel. It's a cartel that's probably in the category of the drug cartel. It's a criminal operation, really, because it steals, it plunders the American people, their purchasing power, because they have the capacity, the legal capacity, the right to create money out of debt, or you might say out of nothing. According to the terms of this cartel, they can create money simply by issuing or rather accepting an IOU. They come to you or me and they say, "How would you like to take out a loan?" We, "Oh, good. What's the interest?" "Oh, it's very low." "Yeah, I'll take out the loan." And they want me to sign a piece of paper, which basically is an IOU. It means I'm promising to pay back the loan. Well, that piece of paper that we sign as an IOU, they monetize. They put that into their books as an asset. You know, that's a valuable thing to them, and therefore they can issue certificates called dollars to offset those liabilities and assets as balances the books, and they create money out of that. In other words, out of nothing, because many of those debts are not paid back; they're just written off, and they know that. The debt that has been amassed right now, trillions of dollars in debt, everyone knows will never be paid off. But those are all dollars that the Federal Reserve System has issued and loaned to individuals, to corporations, businesses, to institutions, and to governments around the world, literally. And they're huge amounts of money. It's that debt that is the basis for our money supply. And they just keep loaning and loaning and loaning and loaning more money and out of more and more and more debt. And everybody said, "My goodness, how high can this debt go?" Well, it can go infinitely high. But as long as the debt expands faster than the rate of products and services, the value of each dollar unit gets lower and lower in value. So that at the end of the process, the money system becomes worthless. We know this because it's been done over and over again by other countries around the world in the past. And whenever a nation undertakes this path of creating money out of nothing or out of debt, which is even worse, um, why then the system collapses. Now that's what's wrong with this cartel. Like a parasite, it doesn't care about the source of its nutrition. If it grabs hold of a tree and it just keeps sucking the sap out of the tree, and the tree gets weaker and withers, and the leaves fall off. It's still struggling for life. The parasite is still, the mold or whatever it is, the moss on the tree is still pulling everything out of it. Till finally the tree dies. And of course, the parasite dies along with it or has to go find another tree. But that's what governments are, literally, especially when they get hold of the monetary system, like the Federal Reserve. And I said the governments, I meant to say the governments and the corporations. There's very little difference in our world today. In case you haven't noticed it, there's sort of a what do they call a rotating window, what do you call these doors with the swinging doors,
Yeah, revolving
round and
door.
round,
Yeah, totally a revolving door.
revolving doors. Thank you. The, the people who are in government, let's say in the Federal Reserve System and the Treasury Department and so forth, they come from the banks, don't they? The people who run the FDA, that control all the food and drug organizations, the key executives in those government agencies come from the very corporations that they were supposed to be controlling. And they move back and forth. It's sort of a little good old boys club, and nobody seems to notice that they're all the same. So what we have now is a monopoly. It's a fraud. It's a scam. It's a plundering mechanism. It's a parasite, whatever you want to call it. But the official name for it is it's a cartel, and it's called the Federal Reserve System.
In your experience of exposing the scam, in your words, of central banking, have you personally faced backlash or censorship or attempts to discredit your work?
No, I haven't had any serious attack, and I'm joking when I say this, but I'm almost disappointed because that tells me that maybe they don't think I'm much of a threat, which I would like to be. But the day will come, I believe. If it's not against me, it'll be against my book or the principles that I have put into my book. The day will come when they'll have to tackle uh, the fact that the public is waking up to the truth of these things I've written about, and they can't allow that to happen. They're going to have to try and discredit either me or others who are disseminating this information, and that includes you. Anybody who gives credence to these ideas will be called a conspiracy theorist and all that sort of stuff.
And I know, like, on that whole kind of distraction front, I guess you could say, is this common refrain that it's to be blamed on the people on the left or it's to be blamed on the people on the right. Yet it seems like increasingly there's more and more people. Like I follow the sound money community, gold and Bitcoin in particular, and I notice that there seems to be something deeper going on in terms of a movement, almost like a political movement. So can you explain, though, the in straightforward terms, what the difference is between, say, collectivism and individualism?
I think the difference between collectivism and individualism is the issue behind all issues. Having said all, maybe there's 2 or 3% that might be outside of that range, but all important issues can be understood, in my view, can be understood a lot more clearly in terms of this difference or this conflict between these two ideologies, collectivism versus individualism. So, what does that mean? Back in the 1960s, that's when I first started to catch fire and wanting to learn about some of these things. I was climbing the corporate ladder. I had no interest in what was going on in the world. I was a very selfish young guy, like most of us are when we're young. I didn't think about my community, didn't think about my country. I didn't think about my fellow human beings or the world, global economy. What is the difference? I'm just having fun. I'm trying to make money and look good. But then I ran into some things that scared the heck out of me. I realized that the United Nations was not what I had been taught it was in school. I was taught that the UN was our last best hope for peace. And that seemed like a good thing for me. And so I just put it aside. Isn't that great? We got the UN. Then I ran across some information that shocked me and actually insulted me because it was saying contrary things, critical things about the UN, that it was just sort of like the Federal Reserve System. It was a scam. It pretended to be something which it was not. And what it was just almost the opposite of what it pretended to be. And at first I rejected that idea. That was outrageous. I did a little research on my own, and blow me down, I came across some facts written by people in the United Nations itself. I came to understand that that was correct. It was a big fraud, and that had been deceived. So then I decided, all of a sudden, I had a crusader gene, and I had to do something about it. I quit my job and started to become, hopefully, become some kind of a force in this vast thing called the universe that could change and correct the path that we were on. I was driven to do it. Now, that's at background. I was about probably 28 or 29 years old or something like that. And I was working for a large corporate entity with one of the regional branches in downtown Los Angeles. And I decided to go into the library down in Los Angeles to do some research with one of my lunch periods. And that's what led me to all these documents and down that path. Well, one of the things I decided at that time, because I realized in the 1960s, the obvious threat to the American way of life, if you go back and put yourself in that time period, was the threat of communism. Communism, well, was taking over the world. They they'd taken over China, they'd taken over Russia, they were in Cuba, they were taking countries in South America, and they were in the streets of America. And all of a sudden, if you didn't see the threat of communism as a threat to the American way of life, you had to be blind. So I said, what is this thing called communism? So I knew that there was a bookstore. I've been told there was a communist bookstore in Los Angeles, in downtown, in my area, called the People's Bookshop. So I went down there and I found it. And I started to hang out in the People's Bookshop for a few months to see if I could learn what it is that was about communism that attracted so many people on the face of it, every country that fell to communism wound up being a horror, a pit of horror. People were killed by the millions. The freedom was lost. The economy crashed. And why would anybody want communism? So I was curious. So I went down to the bookstore, and they're kind of curious about me, and I'm all dressed in a suit, and a tie, a little narrow tie, and sideburns and all that stuff, what you did in the corporate world in those days. And I didn't fit in with them very well, but they thought they had a hot one, maybe a prospect. So I let them think that, and they tried to recruit me. They certainly did. They called those informational study groups, and they got me into those. Well, okay, the bottom line is I read many, if not most, of the important books that they wanted me to read down there. That started with the books by Karl Marx, Das Kapital and the Communist Manifesto. And I read the works of Mao Zedong, and then all of the lesser people in the communist movement in the United States and in Europe. And then I got this idea that I wanted to make a note, a notation of what were the belief systems of communism. And so I started to make a list of what they believed in, not their slogans. I knew that the slogans were all good, from each according to his ability, to each according to his need. Well, what's wrong with that? That sounds like Christian charity, doesn't it? We're against fascism, Nazism, we're against war and discrimination and racism. And what's wrong with that? Those were the slogans. Everybody was going for the slogans. They never read the books. I read the books, and I found out there was much more than that. And the real truth about communism comes not from Marx. They're not the Marxists. They come from Vladimir Ilyich Lenin. Now, Lenin was the originator of the Communist Party, and he was what we really know communism to be. He was the originator of the strategy of communism. I discovered to my amazement that out of all the countries that had fallen to communism, not one of them ever was taken over by Marxists. Not one. They were all taken over by people who self identified as Marxist Leninists. They put those two words together. And I had to find out what that meant. And I did. It's something that most communists who are at least working in bookstores can tell you what it means. Behind most of them was a central theme, which was this. I'm going to paraphrase it. He said, in essence, comrades, it makes no difference what you believe or how smart you are or how good you are in debate, proving that socialism is the right system for the future. The only thing that matters, he said, is to come to power. Now, if you go into a country, he said, and you want to take that country over from the inside, which of course what we communists do was what he said. You don't tell them you're a communist and that you want to change their culture and their legal system and their traditions and even their religions and so on. No, they would reject you. They might even get rid of you, force you out of the country. What you do, comrades, he said, is tell them you're an anti communist. Tell them you believe all of the things that they want to hear. And you are so good at telling them that, and they're hungry to hear that, they will like you. They will follow you. They will elect you into positions of government authority. They will make you their leader. Now, once you come to power and you have the state power in your fingers, now you can reveal your true point of view. And if anybody disagrees with you in debate, you can shoot them. This is Lenin, you see. Coming to power was the most important thing, not winning debates. And it wasn't your ideology, it was the physical, hard, practical tactics of how you capture control of the governments. So that was an eye opening uh, thing for me. So now, with that as background, I decided to make a list of all of these principles, not only the ideology of communism, which is the theory of socialism, but the methodology of communism, which is how do you go about doing it? How do you go about actually capturing control of the mechanisms of the governments? I then decided that what is the opposing force to this? What's the opposite of this? I had been taught in school, again, one of those horrible things, and I believed everything I was taught in school. I was taught that the opposite of communism was fascism. Communism was the extreme left, they said. Fascism was the extreme right, they said. What do you want to be, a communist or a fascist or a Nazi? That was your choice in school. Well, you wanted to be a moderate. You want to be in the middle. But that's not the way the world is. I thought to defeat communism, you had to be opposed to communism. You didn't have to be neutral to it. You have to be on the right. And I remember going through a period where I fell for that. And I called myself a right winger simply because I saw that because of my teacher, what was taught to me. I saw that as the opposite. And today you see many people who call themselves right wingers. And the news outlets always describe the opposite of communism as extreme right. Anyway, I discovered something very amazing. I bought the book Mein Kampf, written by Adolf Hitler. And I took that book and read it also and made notes as to what he believed and the strategies he believed, the ideology and the methodology. And lo and behold, it was exactly, on every point, it was exactly the same as the communists. No serious difference at all. A little window dressing here and there. The Nazis hated the Jews, and the communists hated the rich people. And the communists said, "Oh, we don't care who you hate, but pick one in each country, the one that's least popular, and make that the enemy, so you can divide the people and so forth." The strategy was the same. They maybe picked different targets, but the strategy was the same. Now, to wind this up, I came to the amazing conclusion that there was no difference whatsoever between the extreme right and the extreme left, except the language, the slogans, and so forth. Once I realized that, I was ready for the next discovery, which came from some of the old history books. By old, I mean over 100 years ago. People were writing about ideology and these things, even the methodology, were writing about these things, and they called them individualism versus collectivism. And I always dismissed those words because I didn't know what they meant. They weren't part of my vocabulary. I thought, well, that's old stuff. It doesn't mean anything. Well, I found out it means a lot. And when I discovered that all these issues, these points that they were common to both communists and fascists, then I decided, well, what are the opposites, the true opposites? These were pretended opposites, but they were an opposite. What's the true opposite? And I found the answer in the fact that individualism is the true opposite. Even though we choose sides, we are right wing or left wing. What about being a Democrat or a Republican? Do they really believe any difference? No. Look at their programs. They have different languages, but their strategies and their tactics and their ideology are exactly exactly the same. This ideology that the group must dominate over the individual because it's for the greater good is universally accepted in our world today. And nobody realizes that there's an opposite point of view because they're never even given a discussion on what the opposite is. And so their opposite is no, the individual is the center of society. Because, first of all, the group doesn't even exist. Think about that. You can touch an individual. Can you touch a group? No. It's an abstraction. Where does the state get the authority to use coercion, even lethal coercion, against human beings? Now, the answer most people would say the state gets its authority from the voters or from the citizens, from the consent of the governed. Everybody seems to agree with that, and I think that's sort of the truth. But now that leads to the question, well, if that's true, then what authority does any individual have to use coercion against another human being, including lethal coercion? Oh, I see. Well, let's see. What do you and I have a right to kill somebody for? Let's get to the core of it. Well, not very many things, but there are two things. One in the defense of our own lives, and the other is in defense of our liberty. If somebody's trying to enslave us, make us a slave, or to kill us, I don't think many people would object if we fought, and even if we had to take the life of the person who was trying to destroy us. Very few people would object to that. A few would, but it's a universally accepted thing that if violence is used in self-defense, in defense of the life and liberty, it's authorized. Well, if that's true, then that means that voters can only delegate that power to the state. That means the state does not have any additional power that the voters themselves don't have. A voter can't say, we think this guy should close his shop on Sundays. If my neighbor does that, I'm going to go beat the hell out of him. If necessary, I'll shoot him in the head. No, that would be, you can't do that. But yet we go to the ballot, we vote for that. We authorize them to do something which we did not have the power to authorize the state to do because we didn't have that power. And if you're willing to spend a little time and you dig down, you'll find that dichotomy, that conflict of principles is at the base of, I'm going to say, 99.9% of all political issues that face us today.
So, I guess leading on from that, then, if we think about this collectivist versus individualistic battle that's happening all around us, if we think now from the perspective of today, like current events that we see happening today, including the strategies and tactics that a collectivist takeover might employ or deploy, what kind of movements do we see today that kind of remind you that, yeah, this force, this battle is just the same thing still playing out today?
The short answer is yes. I think there's nothing playing out today except what I'm talking about. And the power behind the throne, so to speak, are these families, these dynasties. Um, we don't have to mention them here because that leads to a lot of other issues. But it's a small group, and it always is a small group at the top throughout history. So the question is, how does this small group protect itself against the millions and trillions of human beings that if they ever get together and rise up, it'd be toast for these few people in the center. Well, they worry a lot about that. That's the only thing they worry about. But they have a plan. Of course, it's divide and conquer. And so all of these totalitarian systems, whether they're the old style ones that just conquered on the basis of military might, or the new style, which conquers on the basis of psychological arguments and mental warfare. The wars we're in today are primarily psychological wars. They're wars over control of the mind. They want people to agree to their own enslavement because they think it's for the greater good of the greater number. We're back to that again. So we do it because they told us it's for our own good. But if we ever got together, we could smash those elitists at the top. So they don't want that to happen, and they spend a lot of time and wisdom and experience, knowledge from experience, to make sure that we're always fighting against each other. Oh, and this split and that split and that split. the blacks against the whites, the men against the women, the rich against the poor, the Christians against the Muslims. I mean, you name it. Whatever there's a possibility of a split, they're there spending a lot of time and money from behind the scenes to make sure that people are hating each other. And that's the only way they can protect themselves from the vast numbers of humanity from uniting. We're in the we're in the battle right now, and that is one of our primary goals is to let people know that this divide and conquer tactic has got to come to an end. And because there's no basis for it, it's all whipped up. It's propaganda. You'll find a few people that are really outrageous people, but no, that's not what we're talking about. This is not these are not masses of people that really hate other masses of people.
So effectively, what you're saying is that we're kind of almost, in a sense, we're programmed to fight against each other and blame other sides. There's a divide amongst all of us, but it's not quite like that, is it?
No, it's not quite like that at all. I mean, there are plenty of room for grievances. Let's not pretend that there is no such thing as racism, for example. But most of what the racism I see in the world today, uh, I think what it's caused by is propaganda, not by actual living experiences. We talk about grievances from the past, the things that happened to the American Indians, for example, with no question of some horrible things, but that's in the past. They want us fighting against our Indian friends because of something that happened hundreds of years ago. They don't care, They just want us fighting and angry at each other. So once you get that message and you understand that this is a ploy, this is a tactic of warfare, and we're the victims. We're falling for it. Then we have a good chance of bringing that all to an end and finding a unity among all humans around the world, regardless of all of these differences. Because the one thing that we all agree on, most of us agree on 99.99%, without question, is we want to be free. We don't want to have anyone, a corporation, a slave master, or a government with a whip or some kind of control over our food supply or our water drinking or health or whatever. We want to be free. And that is the basis for our movement and nothing else.
And so, could you draw a connection there between how those two things are used? So, collectivism and central banking. Is there a common theme there? And is central banking really just one of the manifestations by which this collectivist organization is pushing out against the individual?
It's ideology and methodology. The ideology is the issue of the ethics. Is it right or wrong? What are the goals and so forth? What do you believe in? And the methodology is the tactics and strategy by which you bring it to pass. And how do you put these invisible chains on people's ankles and so forth, so that they willingly go along with their own enslavement? Those are what you would call the methodology of it. So now, with that distinction in mind, I would put the Federal Reserve System into the methodology part. The Fed doesn't have much of an ideological outlook um, that they talk about. But underneath it all, it's presented as being for the greater good of the greater number. But that's simply because it's part of the illusion. They want us to believe it's a function of the government. They want us to think that we have control over our own governments and we determine our political destiny by going to the polls. So that's the idea behind it, that this is for the greater good of the greater number because we all voted, you know. So therefore, and if this is a government agency, we voted for the people at the top of these agencies, and indirectly we have control over it. Well, that's a complete myth when anybody that looks at the reality today. But that's the extent, I think, of how the Federal Reserve might touch on the idea of ideology. It's for the greater good of the greater number. But most of its activity is with the methodology. If they can get everybody dependent on them as the money supply, and if they can take it to the next step, particularly the next step, which is where we don't even have it in our pockets. The one thing about the present fiat system, it is a fiat system today, and that's terrible. That means it's eventually destroying itself. But in the meantime, we can use it. We can have it in our pocket, and we can buy things with it. But when it finally gets to the point where it's digital and it's a stable coin or something like that, we don't even have it in our pockets. And if they decide they don't like us, they turn the switch, and our little card or chip or whatever it is doesn't buy anything. We can't pay for the rent. We can't do anything. We're just out of business. It's the ultimate slavery mechanism. It's more powerful than chains, more confining than a prison cell. It's complete control. We can live in an open air prison without walls, but if they control our economy and our ability to eat and live and have clothing and Medicare and or medical care and warmth against the cold and shelter against the rain and transportation so we can go to work or even have a job. If they control all those things, that's total control. So in that sense, it's the technology that's being applied, and that's where we see the Federal Reserve System coming into play because it is now attempting to evolve into that kind of panopticon I'm just talking about for the whole world. And we must stop it because if we ever get to that point, it'll be a long, long, hard road to come back.
Wow. Okay. So, two more questions. In your view, do you think that there is coordinated alignment between these central banks, or are they all acting within their own jurisdiction, independent of each other?
No, I think they're pretty well coordinated now. They're coordinated through the Bank of International Settlements and Basel, Switzerland, and the heads of uh, these banking systems, so-called banking systems, meet quite regularly together and debate policies, and they all move in unison by design. There might be some variation, but not very much. But from everything I see on the outside, it points to that as a conclusion. They work in unison. That doesn't happen just by accident. So we know they talk together and plan together and move together.
Last question then, and this kind of loops back to what we were just talking about before that one, which is around, you're kind of alluding to central bank issued digital currencies, either directly, obviously, or stealth like via stable coins. I want to read out Revelation 13, verses 15 and 17, just to get your perspective to draw it back to your book, The Creature from Jekyll Island. It says, "The beast forced all people, great and small, rich and poor, free and slave, to receive a mark on their right hands or on their foreheads, so that they could not buy or sell unless they had the mark, which is the name of the beast or the number of its name." So, in your view, could the beast be the same as the creature from Jekyll Island?
It is the same, except it's not on the forehead or on the hand. It's somehow in a ledger somewhere, and it might be tattooed on you. I don't know, but it's the same.
Wow. Okay. Well, on that bombshell, what should the everyday person do to prepare for what's potentially coming in terms of, say, a global currency where our rights are restricted?
Everybody wants to know how do you protect yourself against this? And I always get that question. Should I get gold and silver? Should I plant food in my backyard? Should I stock up on a good source of water? Should I have barrels full of water? Should I form into neighborhood clubs for our mutual defense and so forth? All of these are important questions, and I think we need to address them and participate in most of them. But what upsets me is that almost no one ever raises the question, how do we win this war? It's always, how do we defend ourselves? It was Napoleon that said the purely defensive in warfare is doomed to defeat. If we only think in terms of how do we protect ourselves, we're through. They don't really, I'm going to say they, I'm talking about the elite, don't really care about us trying to protect ourselves. The only thing they worry about is us taking the offense against them. We've got to have our own goals, our own policies, our own vision of the future, our own desire to win this war, not just to survive it for a little bit longer. We have to defeat this enemy. And without that, we're doomed to defeat. We might as well just give up now. I'm not ready for that. I like the question because I realize that whoever asks that question is beginning to understand the severity of the situation we're in. They're beginning to think this, we got to do something about this. I like that. But I am going to say, if we're serious about really surviving, and for our children and our grandchildren for surviving, we've got to think about how do we win this war. And that is a whole new area of discussion. Everything we've been talking about so far is look how bad it is. Look what they're doing to us. The time has come where we have to start talking about how do we not only push back, but how do we win? How do we defeat this enemy? How do we dismantle it, smash it to bits? I don't mean with hammers and hatchets, but take it apart financially and legally. And that's the reason that I created an organization. It's called Freedom Force International. And we have some subcategories of that called Red Pill University and Red Pill Expo. And now we're forming the last stage of it right now, which I think is the most important stage, which is the Red Pill University campuses. We need boots on the ground in every local community in the world. I'm not talking about just the US or where you are. What did you say? You're in New Zealand, did you say?
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Wonderful place, by the way. I was there once. It's a beautiful place. But I, I would be with you trying to defend the heck out of that and reclaim it from the people I know that are running it right now. They're not. They're a lot like our own leaders. They're not our leaders at all. They're our conquerors. But anyway, we have to think in terms of how do we recapture the system and win this war. And so the campuses are the idea where we have boots on the ground of people who totally understand what's going on in the world and have their own plan for how we become active at the local level. In the US, where we want to control our city council, we want our mayor to be one of us. We want to control our county boards of supervisors. We want the sheriff's office, and we want the board of education. We want to have influence in that, and so forth. You can do this with a very small number of people, but you can't do it just by sending emails to each other. You've got to get out of your house and off your couch and meet eyeball to eyeball and go out where the action is, which is in the power centers of society. Those are the political groups and everything is going on in the local community. There's usually some authority group that sits and makes the decisions. We've got to be influential in those groups and not just show up once in a while at a meeting and say we object. No, we got to get into them. I want to participate. I want to. I want to be on the board of directors. Here's my reason. We've got to do in reverse what was done to us. We've lost control of our system not because of guns and bayonets. It was not a military war. They quietly took over our institutions while we were watching Dancing with the Stars. And now we wonder what happened. Well, that's what happened. They moved into and dominated the power centers of our societies. And now that's how we take it back, one by one, and replace these collectivists by whatever other name they call themselves. Replace them by individualists, by whatever the name they want to call themselves. That is how we win. And if anybody wants to know more about that, please go to redpilluniversity.org. And within 24 hours, I will have a page there where if you are interested in getting information on how to form a campus in your community, I'd love nothing else better than to see one in New Zealand or more than one, maybe 5 or 6 or 7, who knows? This is how we're going to win. If we don't think aggressively like that, then we might as well just give up. So it's redpilluniversity.org.
Thank you so much. I will leave a
Well, thank
link
you.
to
Thank you
that.
for asking that question.
No problem. I'll leave a link to that in the notes as well so that people can find that. Well, thank you very much, Mr. Griffin, for your time today. Really appreciate it. And hopefully we'll catch up with you again in the future.
All right. Well, thank you. And to anybody else who's still online listening, thank you for hanging in there.